Who was Christ? This occurred during the time of the pharaoh Seti I. It was a time when the people of Earth had all become materialistic. In Egypt, it was common in high society to take drugs, likewise, in Greece. Fornication with animals was by no means rare, something which is absolutely contrary to nature and universal law. Our mission being to help when it was deemed necessary, we decided to change the course that history was taking, by intervening at this point. We had to get the Hebrews out of Egypt, for they could no longer evolve as a free people while under the evil domination of the Egyptians. It was decided to send a man, capable and just, to lead the Hebrews from Egypt and back to the land they had occupied previously, that is, soon after their arrival on Earth. On the planet Naxati, a planet of the 8th category, a man by the name of Zioexton had just died. His astral body was waiting to be reincarnated on Thiaoouba, when it was put to him, that instead, he might be the liberator of the Hebrews. He agreed to this and went to Earth as Moses. Moses, then, was born in Egypt of Egyptian parents. His father was the equivalent of a sub-lieutenant in the army. Moses was not born a Hebrew, that is yet another error in the Bible. The story of the little Hebrew baby set adrift in the water and rescued by a princess is very romantic, but incorrect. What a shame. I always loved that story. It's quite wonderful, like a fairy story. Fairy tales are indeed very pretty, Michel, but you must concern yourself with the truth, not fantasy. Promise me that you will only report what is the truth? Of course, have no fear, your instructions will be followed to the letter, so to speak. I was explaining then, that Moses was born in an Egyptian, military family. His father's name was Lethotes. Until the age of 10, Moses played often with the Hebrew children. A pretty and amiable child, he was popular with the Hebrew mothers who indulged him with offerings of sweets. In turn, they won his heart and he came to love his Hebrew friends like brothers. This is why he was incarnated, of course, but you must realize that, after having seen his life as Moses flash before him, and, after accepting to live that life, all details of it were erased from his memory. He passed through what certain Nagas have called the river of oblivion. This happens whether one accepts or rejects a possible reincarnation. Of course, there is a reason for it. If, for example, you remembered that, around 40 years of age, you would lose your wife and 2 cherished children in a car accident and that you, yourself, would be confined to a wheelchair, the knowledge could tempt you to take your life rather than face up to your troubles, or it might lead you to behave badly in other spheres. So, the film is erased, in something like the way you wipe out a tape recording. Occasionally, by accident, the machine does not erase everything and you can hear brief portions of what should have been erased. Of course, my analogies are fanciful when I speak of films and tape recordings, but I hope they give you an idea of what I am trying to explain. In reality, the process involves electrophotonics, which mean nothing, yet, to people on Earth. This, in fact, occurs often in the films that the higher self shows to an astral body, which is why most people say, on several occasions in the course of their lives, I have seen that before, or I have heard that before, and they know what the very next action or word will be. In English, people call this feeling déjà vu. Yes, I understand well what you are saying. The strangest such experience that I have had was when I was in French Equatorial Africa. I was in the army and we were on maneuvers about 600 kilometers from base. We were approaching the Chad border and I was standing with other soldiers in the back of a troop carrier facing the road. Suddenly, I recognized the road as if I'd been there just a fortnight before. I was as though hypnotized by this stretch of road that ended with a right-angled bend. I recognized the road, however, I was also sure that, around the bend, I was going to see a little straw hut, all by itself, sheltered by a mango tree. I was increasingly convinced that such would be the case and, when the truck took the bend, there it was, a lone straw hut beneath a mango tree. And then it was over, I recognized nothing more. My face turned white. My nearest companion asked me if I was feeling all right, and I explained what had happened. His response was, "You must have come here as a kid." I knew that my parents had never set foot in Africa, but I still wrote to them, so strongly had the experience affected me. Their reply was, "No, and you never left us to make any such accompanied journeys when you were little." So, my friend suggested that I might have gone there during a previous existence, for he was a believer in reincarnation. What do you think of that? It's what I've just explained to you, Michel. Quite a long segment of your film was not erased for you, and I'm glad, for it illustrates very well what I was explaining to you in regard to Moses. He wanted to help the Hebrews, but, as he chose to enter that world by the usual means, as a newborn baby, he was obliged to forget what the course of his life would be. However, in rare cases such as this one, the astral body is so charged with knowledge and experience from previous lives, that it has no trouble adapting to what it must learn in its new physical body. Moses was also advantaged in that he was sent to a good school with numerous facilities. He was enormously successful in his studies and gained entry into a much higher school of science, headed by priests and Egyptian experts. At this time, the Egyptians still had high schools which catered for a very limited elite, teaching some of the learnings Thoth brought from Atlantis a long time previously. He was near finishing his studies, when he was witness to an incident that had great significance in his life. Still feeling great friendship towards the Hebrews, he often walked with them, despite the urgent recommendations of his father not to do so. The Hebrews were becoming increasingly despised by the Egyptians, and his father advised Moses not to mix with this race. Nevertheless, on this day he was walking in the vicinity of a building site where Hebrews were working under the directions of Egyptian soldiers. From afar he saw a soldier hit a Hebrew, who fell to the ground. Before he could intervene, a group of Hebrews threw themselves on the soldier and killed him, then they buried him quickly in foundations being made to hold an enormous column. Moses didn't know what to do, but he was seen by a couple of the Hebrews as he moved away. Believing he would denounce them, the Hebrews panicked and hastened to spread the word that it was Moses who had killed the soldier. When he arrived home, his father was waiting for him and advised him to go, immediately, into the desert. The Bible story that he went to the country of Madian is true, as is the report of his marriage to the daughter of the priest of Madian. I am not going to elaborate further on the details. We wanted to save these people from the slavery into which they'd fallen and, worse, from the clutches of evil priests who were a danger to their psyche. More than 1,000,000 years earlier, we had saved another group of people from the hands of other dangerous priests, if you recall, and, interestingly, it was in practically the same location. Do you see how history is just a perpetual recommencement? Moses led the Hebrews from Egypt much as it is described in the Bible, but, before proceeding, I must rectify certain errors, since we know that many people on earth are greatly interested in this famous exodus. First of all, the pharaoh at the time was Ramses II, who was successor to Seti I. Next, the Hebrews numbered 375,000 and, when they arrived at the Sea of Reeds, and not the Red Sea, our spaceships, numbering 3, opened the waters, which were quite shallow, by means of our force field. We allowed the waters to close again, but not a single Egyptian soldier drowned, simply because they hadn't followed the Hebrews into the water. The pharaoh, in spite of enormous pressure from the priests, did not retract his promise and let the Hebrews leave. The manna, distributed every day, came from our spacecraft. I must explain to you that manna is not only very nourishing, as you know, but also very compactable, which is why many spaceships carry it on board. However, if you leave manna too long exposed to the air, it becomes soft and rots within 18 hours. That's why we recommended that the Hebrews take only as much as they needed for each day, and those who took more soon saw they had made a mistake and that they should have followed the advice of the Lord God, who was actually us. The Hebrews did not take 40 years to reach Canaan, but only 3.5 years. Lastly, the story of Mount Sinai is almost true. We landed on the mountain so as not to be seen by the people. It was preferable at the time, for these simple people to believe in a God, rather than in extraterrestrials who watched over them and helped them. So that is the explanation of the Hebrew people, Michel, but it isn't finished. In our eyes, these were the only people who followed the right direction, that is, the direction of spirituality. Among them, and, later, among their great priests, there were some who rumored that a Messiah was going to come and save them. They should not have told the people that, for they were reporting a part of the conversation we had with Moses on Mount Sinai. Since then, the Hebrews have been waiting for the arrival of the Messiah, and yet, he has already come. Let's now jump in time. The Hebrews, back again in the land they had originally settled, were now better organized. They established a civilization notable for great royal legislators such as Solomon and David, to name but two. We observed that these people, following Solomon's death, were heading towards anarchy and allowing themselves to be influenced by evil priests. Alexander the Great invaded Egypt but, in the end, did nothing constructive for the world. The Romans succeeded him, building an immense empire that was oriented more towards materialism than spirituality. The great peoples, such as the Romans, were technologically advanced for their time, relatively speaking, of course. But they brought with them a smattering of gods and beliefs, just enough to cause spiritual confusion, and, certainly, not enough to lead the people to universal truth. This time, we decided to give a big hand. Rather than give it in a spiritually sterile land like Rome, we did it in Israel, thinking that the Hebrews were very intelligent, having ancestors who were spiritually highly advanced. We considered them adequate to propagate universal truth. The Hebrew people were unanimously elected by the great Thiaoouba. On earth, they were referred to as the chosen people, and the name could not be more appropriate. They were indeed chosen. Our plan was to capture public imagination by sending a messenger of peace. The story of the birth of Jesus, as you know it, with the Virgin Mary as mother, is quite true. The appearance of an angel at the Annunciation is correct in every detail. We sent a spaceship and one of us appeared before the Virgin, who was indeed a virgin, telling her she was going to become pregnant. The embryo was implanted in her while she was under hypnosis. I see, Michel, you are having enormous difficulty believing what I have been saying. Never forget that we have the knowledge, you have not seen 1/10 of what we can do. Attend carefully and I will give you a few examples to help you understand what I'm going to tell you. Thou stopped talking and appeared to be concentrating. As I watched, her face became a blur and, instinctively, I rubbed my eyes. Of course, this did not help and, in fact, she became progressively transparent until I could see right through her. Finally, she was no longer there, she had completely disappeared. Thou, I called, slightly concerned, where are you? Here, Michel. I jumped, for the voice came as a whisper, quite close to my ear. But you are completely invisible. Now, yes, but you are going to see me again. Look, my goodness, what has happened to you? Several feet in front of me, I saw the silhouette of Thou, completely golden yet radiant, as though inside her there burned a fire, its flames brief but intense. As for her face, it was recognizable but her eyes seemed to send forth little rays each time she spoke. She began to rise a few feet above the ground, without having moved a muscle of her body, then she started to circle the room, so fast I had trouble keeping my eyes on her. She stopped, eventually, above her seat and sat her ghostly form down. It was as though she were made of a shining mist, she was still recognizable as Thou and yet, quite transparent. The next instant she was gone. I looked around, but she had completely vanished. Look no further, Michel, I am back. Indeed, there she was, in flesh and bone again, sitting on her seat. How do you do that? As I was just explaining to you, we have the knowledge. We can revive the dead, cure the deaf and the blind, make people walk who are paralyzed, we can cure any malady you care to name. We are masters, not of nature, but in nature, and we can do the thing most difficult of all, we can generate life spontaneously. Out of the release of cosmic ray, we can create any type of living creature, including man. You mean that you have mastered the test tube baby? Not at all, Michel. You reason like an earthling. We can create a human body, but that is done only by the great Thiaoouba, taking infinite care, for the human body must be inhabited by several bodies, as you are aware, the physiological, the astral etc. If not, it would merely be a robot. Perfect knowledge is therefore required for such an undertaking. So, how much time do you need to create a baby? You have not quite grasped what I am saying, Michel. I am speaking, not of a baby but, in this case, of an adult human being. A man of 20 or 30 years of age can be created by the Thiaoouba in approximately 24 of your Earth hours. As one might expect, I was completely stunned by this disclosure. I had traveled in a spaceship at a speed several times that of light and had found myself billions of kilometers from my home. I had met extraterrestrials, traveled in astral body, journeyed in time to witness scenes that occurred thousands of years ago. I could now see auras and understand languages I'd never heard before. I had even visited, briefly, Earth's parallel universe. I thought I knew what there was to be known, by an Earthling, of these people and their capabilities, thanks to the explanations given to me. Now, it seemed I was being told that what I'd been presented with was like an hors d'oeuvre. My hosts could create a living human being in 24 hours. Thou was watching me, reading me like an open book. Now that you follow my meaning, Michel, I'll finish the story which is going to interest so many of your fellow men, insofar as the Bible has distorted it a little. So, our angel implanted an embryo, so that Mary, a virgin, found herself pregnant. By acting in this way, we hope to attract the attention of the people and emphasize that the coming of Jesus was really a remarkable event. On the birth of the child, we appeared before the shepherds in the same way that I demonstrated a few moments ago. We didn't send the 3 famous wise men, they are part of the legend that has been grafted on to real events. However, we did guide the shepherds and a group of the people towards the spot where Jesus was born. This was accomplished by sending forth one of our spheres and rendering it luminous. The optical effect thereby created, made it, indeed, resemble a star over Bethlehem. Nowadays, if we were to do such a thing, people would be crying, UFO. Eventually the priests, and those whom the priests named prophets, learned of the birth. In view of the phenomena of the star and the angels, the prophets announced to the people, the birth of the Messiah, referring to him as the King of the Jews. King Herod, however, had spies in all quarters, as most leaders do. When they reported these remarkable events to him, he found it all difficult to understand and became frightened. In those times, the lives of the people were worth little to their leaders, and Herod had no qualms about ordering the deaths of 2,606 babies in the region. While these deaths were being carried out, we evacuated, under hypnosis, Mary, Joseph and the baby Jesus, as well as 2 donkeys, in our spaceship, depositing them in a spot quite close to Egypt. Do you see how the facts have been distorted? Now, there are other details which were reported conscientiously, but they are inaccurate due to lack of information. Let me explain. The baby Jesus, born in Bethlehem, proved, by the miracles pertaining to his birth, that he was quite special and was, in fact, the Messiah. So, we had captured the imagination of the people, but, when a baby is born, its astral body cannot know all, in regards to its previous knowledge. This was the case of Moses too, and yet he was a great person. We required a messenger who would be able to persuade humanity that there was another life beyond this one, through reincarnation of the astral body, etc. This was no longer commonly accepted since civilization on Earth had become more and more degraded following the disappearance of Atlantis. You know that, when you want to explain something that is not a material fact, even to your closest friends, you are confronted by skepticism. People seek material proof and, if they don't see it with their own eyes, they won't believe. In order to transmit our message, we needed someone who behaved like an extraordinary being, like someone coming from the heavens, who performed what would appear to be miracles. Such a person would be believed and his teachings would be listened to. As you know, an astral body being reincarnated as a baby, passes through the river of oblivion, and his earlier material knowledge is effaced. Therefore, the child born in Bethlehem would not have been able to perform miracles even if he lived to 100 years of age. However, he was a superior being, like Moses. This is proven by the way he astonished temple doctors at the age of 12. Like the very young people now on Earth, who are called geniuses because they seem to have a calculation in their heads, Jesus was a human being inhabited by a highly evolved astral body. And yet, even if he had studied in the very advanced schools on Earth, amongst the Nagas, for example, he never could have acquired the knowledge to revive the dead or cure the sick. I know that, on Earth, there are people who believe that, from the age of 12, until his return to Judea, Jesus studied in the monasteries of India and Tibet. This is how they try to explain the gap that exists in the Bible, when Jesus simply disappeared from Bethlehem. He left his parents' home at the age of 14, accompanied by his 12-year-old brother Ariki. He traveled to Burma, India, China and Japan. His brother accompanied Jesus everywhere, until Ariki was accidentally killed in China. Jesus took a lock of Ariki's hair with him, for he loved him very much. Jesus was 50 years of age when he arrived in Japan, where he married and had 3 daughters. Finally, he died in the Japanese village of Shingo, where he had lived for 45 years. He was buried in Shingo, which is on the main island of Japan, Honshu, and beside his tomb is another, containing the little box holding Ariki's lock of hair. Those of your fellow men who like evidence can go to Shingo, formerly known as Harai, in the district of Aomori. But let's go back to our precise mission in this regard. The only messenger we could send to earth had to be one of us. The Christ, who died on the cross in Jerusalem, was called Ariok. He was brought by us, to the desert of Judea, having volunteered to change his physical body. Thus, he abandoned his hermaphrodite body, which had lived some considerable time on Thiaoouba, and took on the body of Christ, created for him by our Thauri. By so doing, he maintained totally the knowledge he possessed on Thiaoouba. Why couldn't he have remained in his body and simply reduced it in size, as Latoli and Biostra did, in front of me? Couldn't he have stayed long enough in a shrunken body? There was another problem, Michel. He had to resemble a human being from Earth in all respects, and, since we are hermaphrodites, we couldn't risk the Hebrews noticing that this messenger from God was half female. We can regenerate a body at will, which is why you have seen so few children on Thiaoouba. We can also create a body, as I have just explained, and we can reduce it in size. Don't look at me like that, Michel. I realize that it is difficult for you to assimilate all this and to believe what I tell you, but we have already revealed enough for you to know that we are capable of mastering most natural phenomena. Jesus, who came from Thiaoouba, was taken by us into the desert, and you know what followed. He knew that he would come up against numerous difficulties and that he was going to be crucified. He knew all, for he had previewed his life with us, but he had done so as an astral body in a physical body. He remembered, just as you will remember and will always remember your journey to Mu and the glimpses of your previous lives. The visions, I repeat, seen by astral bodies in physical bodies are not erased in the way that visions seen by astral bodies with the higher selves are. Thus, he knew all and knew exactly what to do. Of course, he had the power to resuscitate the dead, cure the blind and the deaf, and, when he was crucified and dead, we were there to take him away and revive him. We rolled the stone from the tomb, quickly took him to our spacecraft which was positioned nearby and, there, revived him. At the right moment, he appeared again, thereby providing his immortality, showing that there was, indeed, life after death, and regenerating hope among the people by persuading them that they did belong to the Creator and that each of us possesses a spark of his divinity. So, all his miracles were performed in order to prove that what he preached was true? Yes, because the Hebrews and the Romans would never have believed him if he hadn't proven himself. There was a very good example of the strength of skepticism among people on earth regarding the Shroud of Turin. Although millions believe in the coming of Jesus and practice, more or less, Christian religions, they were anxious to hear the results of research by experts, into whether or not the shroud covered Christ after his death. You now know the answer to this. However, people seek proof and more proof, and still more proof, for doubt still exists in their minds. Buddha, an earthling, who acquired his understanding through his own study, did not say, as your fellow men do, I believe, but rather, I know. Faith is never perfect but knowledge is. When you return to earth and tell your story, the first thing you will be asked is for evidence. If we were to give you, for example, a piece of metal which doesn't exist on Earth, there would always be one, among the experts who analyze it, who would insist that you prove the metal was not created by a clever alchemist of your acquaintance, or some such thing. Will you give me something as proof? Michel, don't disappoint me. You will have no material proof, for precisely the reasons I have just outlined, there would be no point. Faith is nothing in comparison with knowledge. Buddha knew, and when you return to Earth, you too, will be able to say, I know. There is a well-known story of doubting Thomas who wanted to touch Christ's wounds, for, seeing them with his own eyes did not convince him enough, and yet, when he touched them, he was still doubtful. He suspected some kind of magic trick. You know nothing of nature on your planet, Michel, and, as soon as something occurs which is a little beyond your understanding, everyone claims it is magic. Levitation equals magic, invisibility equals magic, and yet we are only applying natural laws. Rather, you should say, levitation equals knowledge and invisibility equals knowledge. So, Christ was sent to earth to preach love and spirituality. He had to contend with people who were not highly evolved, speaking to them in parables. When he tipped over the merchants' tables at the temple, angry for the first and only time, he was making a statement against money. His mission was to impart a message of love and goodness, love one another, and also to enlighten the people in regard to the reincarnation of astral bodies and immortality. This was all distorted by priests in the time that followed, and numerous disagreements led to the rise of the many sects which claim to follow the teachings of Christ. Christians, throughout the centuries, have even killed in the name of God. The Inquisition was a good example, and the Spanish Catholics in Mexico behaved worse than the most savage tribes, all in the name of God and Christ. Religions are a veritable curse on your planet, as I have said, and as I have proved. As for the new sects that are springing up and flourishing all over the world, they are based on control by brainwashing. It is terrifying to see young people, healthy in body and spirit, throw themselves at the feet of charlatans claiming to be gurus and great masters, when the latter are masters of only two things, talking and collecting fabulous sums of money. This, of course, gives them power and enormous pride to see themselves dominating entire crowds of people who submit to them, body and soul. Not long ago, there was even one leader who asked his followers to commit suicide, and they obeyed. Since on earth they love proof, there is an excellent one to give them. Universal law forbids suicide. If this master had been genuine, he would have known this. In demanding this sacrifice from them, he presented the greatest proof of his ignorance. Sects and religions are a curse on earth, and when you see that the Pope sets aside millions of francs or dollars for his travel, when he could make do with much less, and use what money is available to help countries suffering from famine, you cannot persuade me that it is the word of Christ which directs such actions. There is a passage in your Bible that says, "It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter paradise." The Vatican is certainly the wealthiest church on your planet, and yet the priests have made vows of poverty. They have no fear of being damned, yet they believe in damnation, because they say it is the church which is rich, not them. This is really just a play on words since they make up the church. It's like the son of a multi-billionaire claiming that he is not rich, only his father is. The church has not distorted the passage in the Bible relating to wealth. They have used it to their advantage, for isn't it preferable that the rich grow poorer at the profit of the church? The young generations on earth are in the process of self-examination. They have come to a turning point, events have led them to it, and I know that they feel alone, more than any younger generation has before them. It isn't by joining sects or religious groups that they are going to be free of their solitude. First, if you want to elevate yourself, you must meditate and then concentrate, which is different, although often the two are confused. You do not need to go to a special place, for the greatest and most beautiful temple of man is inside himself. There, he can enter into communication with his higher self, by concentration, asking his higher self to help him surmount his earthly, material difficulties. But certain people need to communicate with other human beings, like themselves, and they can meet together for this purpose. Those who are more experienced will be able to give advice, but no one should ever adopt a position as master. The master came 2,000 years ago, or rather, I should say, one of the masters, but men crucified him. However, for approximately 300 of your years, the message he brought with him was followed. After that, it was distorted, and now, on earth, you have returned to a point that is worse than that of 2,000 years ago. The young generation of whom I have just spoken, are rising up on your planet and realizing, little by little, the truth of many of the things I have been talking about. But they must learn to look inside themselves for their answers. They should not wait for help to come to them from elsewhere, or they will be disappointed.